Did I get it? Yeah, I'm on. Okay, so I actually do have this bigger presentation of this morning's workshop online. It is at a kind of sizable URL, so I'll give you a minute to copy that down, but that's the slides of this presentation as a PDF, so it doesn't include like some of the QuickTime stuff that's going to be in here, but you can use that however you like. The only thing that I ask is that you just give me credit. But it's under Creative Commons license, so go ahead and present it if you want at your organization or wherever you like. That's the URL. I'll just give you another minute to copy that down. Any questions before we get started? Anything you thought of over the break that I can help you with or that we could discuss? This next half of the presentation will make it a little more interactive because I have a lot of questions for you all about how this stuff is working. I kind of edged onto that a little bit when I was talking a couple days ago in the shorter presentation that I gave about just how different a lot of the interactions on the web is today. And I want to talk about this Web 2.0 stuff, this stuff that I put this up the other day as an example of kind of how I saw the web, the cycles that we've gone through, the boom and bust, or the bubble and the bust, is maybe even a better way of putting it. How things went, like we did a whole bunch of work and worked really fast, and a lot of people got really excited. There was a big redistribution of wealth, and then, man, it just came apart in 2000. And it's probably a good thing. I mean, as hard as it was to see, a lot of colleagues and friends really struggle with, what's happening on the web, I think ultimately it was a good thing to sort of hit that reset button and say, man, I think our priorities are a little messed up, right? We've got a lot of good work that we should be doing, and a lot of we've invented a lot of really cool things, but the way in which we're applying that to business or trying to change business, maybe we've gone a little too far. In 2001, man, it was a different world all of a sudden, and it was really kind of a good. That's when a few friends of mine and I started the company Adaptive Path, and it was a great time to start a company, frankly, because, there was still work to be done, much smaller scale. You had to kind of work for it and fight for it. It wasn't like the web design consultants of years past that were just picking the interesting projects that had enough equity assigned to them. But it was a great time to start a company and start to get back down to the fundamentals, and that's what I want to talk a little bit about, is this idea that I started talking about a couple days ago that we're kind of calling Web 2.0 now, right? This stuff that I walked through. But what are the implications on design and how we approach design? All of this stuff. Like, I really like all of these ideas, but how do they synthesize together into the nuts and bolts of the things that the solutions, right? So you can think of the two halves of this workshop as this morning where we talked about identifying problems, understanding our users, bringing that into the equation so we know where to start, that foundation. And this part as how we approach the solutions for the problems that we've uncovered in our users, right? Now is the time to start thinking about what is happening on the screen. How do we document this stuff? How do we think a little bit differently about the stuff that we've been solving for a long time? So again, this is Tim O'Reilly's Web 2.0 meme map. And I am probably as sick of the idea, the phrase Web 2.0 as all of you are, especially probably after this last couple of days where it's probably you've been hearing about it over and over again. But that has more to do with the fact that trends come barreling through our industry and that terms get associated with very good ideas, but that gets diffused over time. And it turns into, like, you guys, you're doing the Web 2.0 stuff? Yeah, great. We got the Ajax, great, awesome. And nobody knows what they're talking about anymore. And they use that as a way to, frankly, to build stuff without the foundations behind it. So let's go from here and talk about some themes and how we're going to design around these themes. How do you respond to this phrase, this sentence up here? Your website is a tiny piece of a much larger experience. What does that mean? That's my question to you. Because I can see that in a lot of the themes that Tim had on that chart. Your website, part of a larger experience. Your company should be more than just a website. Tell me a little more about that.
Well, a website is an interface to access the company. The company cannot solely be a website.
A company cannot solely be a website. However, I would say that the flip side of that is an analogy my partner Peter Merholz likes to make, which is that your website is like the canary in the coal mine for your company. So your website may not be, or your company may not be entirely just the website. There's so much more that goes into that. But at the same time, that experience that people have on their website taints their perception of everything else that happens in your organization. The canary in the coal mine, right? Like I go to a website, I go to Maytag, I have that experience. I have a brand impression now of them forever, right? Well, how else could we interpret this? Did you have a...
Well, that our user is not just, we're just one piece in a larger task that they're trying to accomplish.
We are one piece in a larger task that they're trying to accomplish. How would that, what are the implications of that for your website?
So at our website, they're looking for a job, but they may be actually trying to manage their career.
So you have a website, staffing website. So they may use it for a little piece of overall managing their career and where they're going in their career, as opposed to you assuming, like that site I showed you from the Haas School of Business at Berkeley. My website will be everything for everybody, but rather maybe it's just a little piece of a larger experience. How about technically? How does that fit in? Anybody? Yeah. So your website is part of a bigger community of the web. So, and you said that we need to work together to be compliant for our users. What do you mean by that? So a common language of terms, of solutions, frankly. Right. Everybody knows what home means on the web. Many of you probably saw a presentation from Steve Mulder. I don't know if he talked about this or not, but back in the day, Steve worked for a company that did a lot of work for Martha Stewart's website. This, I think, was pre-jail term. And they had this argument, like they had these categories for the different areas of the Martha Stewart website, one of which was home, stuff for your home, like projects around the home. And they're like, you just can't use that term like for a category of your website because that means go to the home page, right? Like that's a household, yeah, sure. That's a superficial example, but again, like what you're getting at. And now, so we're going to look at how a lot of the changes in web technology are affecting some of the very core principles of what we thought about in interaction design, right? What happens if you click on something and data changes, but the page doesn't reload? How do you communicate that to people? It's different now. And so, yeah, I think you're right. We're sort of feeling around for what that means with, like, because people aren't just coming to our site. They're coming to every other site, and that's where they're building their understanding of how the web works. So that's good. Anybody else have anything? Let's look at another one of these. Nobody sees your website the way you expect. Few use your content the way you intend. That's a tough one. You're almost always wrong. Yeah, I could put that up there too. Or you could design with this intent, right? You could be cool with that. It depends on where you place the control in your design, right? And I spoke a lot about sort of giving control to users. So if I have a very specific intention for how I expect my website to be used, and get frustrated because people just won't use it that way, it could be a perspective on design as opposed to a problem with my users. Let's try another one. Everything you create online is being ripped apart and recombined with other stuff by thousands of curious geeks, or at least it should be. How would your organization feel about that? It's an API, sure, but how would your organization feel about that? There's no way they'd go for it. How about anybody else? Does anybody currently have a product on the web that has an open API that anybody can use? Is anybody here? You do? What do you, Symantec?
We have parts of our site we want people to take and put on their site.
Parts of your site that you want people to take. Well, sure.
There are sections of our site that
You can't give that to people. I'm not going to try to recreate the noise she just made when her organization thinks about, like, but... Right, so you're a big enterprise software company and you have a whole bunch of documentation online. Why not make it a wiki? Right? Why not make it editable by anybody?
But of course,
Why
the
not?
ones that are editable by anybody or whatever, or grabbable by anybody, are really hard to find.
Well, in your organization, they're hard to find, right? But, okay. Were you laughing about that? You thought that was absurd to make your... Oh, yeah, I like the noise too. I can't do it. Go ahead. You have scrapers taking your content. Because you know why? Because the web, the way it's built, is an API. Because everything you put into a browser is accessible to anybody and they can take it. I remember, man, there was some stock photography website that I saw one time that used complicated JavaScript to disable right-clicking, right? So that you couldn't like right-click on that image and save it to the desktop. So you had to take a screenshot, right? Like, come on. If it's there, it's taken, right? With that assumption, though, how does that change our organizations? Should it? How does what's happening with some of these new sort of Web 2.0 companies where they are repositories for data and let it flow out to users however they want to use them and recombine them, pages that are editable, comments on every blog. Adaptive Path is built, our website is built as a blog, and we don't have comments turned on right now because when we built the website, we knew that we were 6 people, and literally 120% of our time was going to consulting work, and there was no way we could manage that conversation. So there was a resource issue, but at the same time, like, man, we're not practicing what we preach. Like, why don't we have comments? Right? At the very least, we put all our content under a Creative Commons license, which has paid us dividends forever. We see our essays that we write showing up all over the web, always with attribution. That's the only thing we asked for was attribution. So, yeah. People using aggregators. That's a great, let me go back one. Nobody sees your website the way you expect. I can't tell you what, I read 150 to 200 blogs. I kind of keep up with them, roughly. I can't tell you what 90% of them look like, because I never go. I read in my RSS aggregator. What does that mean for designers? That's a nervous laugh. That's nice. What do you think? Is there nothing to design? But if we think about the overall experience, right? So that's some stuff for us to talk about a little bit. So how about this? The easiest way to fail these days on the web is trying to control all of that, to control the way your site is designed. I'll tell you, of those 200 websites that I read in an aggregator, none of them that I subscribe to just give me brief snippets of copy. Right? Because a lot of people try to do that. They're like, we're on the RSS. Like, we're going to have people subscribe to our blog, but they need to click through, because how can we monetize this? But I don't. It's what I was talking about the other day when I talked about paying for words.
It's kind of interesting how that's changed, because in the early days, weren't there some lawsuits around people framing other people's content?
Right. Remember he's talking about the lawsuits, what they call deep linking, right? Where people would frame another person's website, or even some organizations saying you may only link to our homepage because we need to capture the eyeballs. You can't link to an individual page. You don't hear about that much anymore, huh? It was, right. It's a little bit like selling CDs with viruses in them, right, to make sure that people don't copy the music. It's a little bit like trying to sue people that love your content because they're not using it the right way. And I don't have answers for what the right way is, but I think we can take a step in that direction, and that's what I want to talk about a little bit with this notion that the meme of Web 2.0 is about the old problems that have been around for a while, right? I talked about this the other day. New platform of these convergence of technologies that are available in modern browsers now. And I thought, frankly, around 2001 that we were done with browsers, right? Like, there's no competition here. Netscape's going away. Microsoft have everything. They disbanded the IE team. We're just not going to see innovation in the browser. Frankly, that was the best possible time for that to happen, right? There was just as Firefox was taking off 5 years ago, just as Netscape was kind of shutting down, Microsoft was entrenched. We realized, like, the platform's going to be here for a while, so let's get really good at that. And you probably saw half of the sessions about cascading style sheets and design, and a way to do design around that. That's where that came from. The fact that, like, we couldn't just keep jumping to innovation. We had to stop, get good at what we were left with. Well, that's starting over again. That's sort of taking off again. IE7 beta released yesterday, 2 days ago maybe. There's innovation happening in the browsers again. And we're now starting to see, like, everybody has moved up to a platform where we can start to experiment again. And that's where the rich internet application themes are coming from, especially in a conference like this, right? We have the ability to try some new stuff, apply this new platform to the old problems that we've had, and so much more participation now. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we could only dream of a majority of our audience on a broadband connection, always on, all the time, comfortable with web technology, used to using these things, right? That's relatively new. And the fact that we have that majority now in broadband, in the sort of pathetic broadband that we have here in North America at least, but it's still remarkable that we have this opportunity, that we can assume sort of an always-on, relatively fast connection for people. Yeah? The new problem being the noise. What do you mean by the noise? Yeah, of course it's noisy. Well, I agree, and if you couldn't hear what she said there's a lot of noise out there right now. There's a lot of everything, like all bets are off, a lot of experimentation, users doing everything, and good ideas can get lost in that shuffle. And I agree, and it's cyclical. It's just like the business is cyclical, and they tend to follow each other, right? Once everybody stopped like trying to become an internet millionaire overnight, we got back to work and started to hone the craft, right? And now that started ramping back up, and it will be crazy. It already is. I mean, I had that screen in my other presentation with 50 different logos from all the new tiny little startups that are out there like vying for your attention. There are 8 Ajax desktops that you can customize and create, and they're all going for funding right now. And there are 9 different file sharing services now that are all looking for their first angel round of funding. So yeah, there's a lot of noise now, and there's a lot of capital being moved towards these new ideas, but I think that's great, frankly. That we have, a new platform that we can start experimenting with again. Now that we've gotten to a level where the assumption is that a website needs to be built with web standards. I mean, that was a big deal 5 years ago. Like when Doug Bowman did the redesign of Wired News, and a commercial website came out that validated. Like in the design community, nobody could even get their minds around that. Like, oh my God, somebody's finally done this. How on earth did somebody pull this off? And now that it may not be the standard, especially not in sort of large companies with a lot of legacy, but for most new stuff, building around web standards is an assumption. Like that's a step that we took forward. So now we'll have the noise and the confusion and the scary bit, and we'll move forward again. So let's look at an example of this. How many of you use a podcast from time to time? All right, about half of you. But is everybody familiar with the whole notion of podcast? Yeah, lots of nodding. This is a great example. Right? I think Ajax as a concept is another great example of something that frankly has been around forever on the web, but takes that old problem, this old problem, just streaming audio, and adds this new platform and this new participation. Right? I pulled this up. I think it was Slash.some guy. I'm sure it was a guy. That said, it's just streaming audio, for God's sakes. This guy said, you know, for I don't know how long I've been, got a cron job that calls MPlayer and pipes to lame for MP3 encoding and custom shell scripts that called wget to scrape for program listings and put everything into RSS. Come on, why do we need to call this podcasting and have a bunch of new startups around that? Because there are, you know, maybe 5 people in the world that can do this. That's why. But we have now a new platform, a new sort of, I mean, as something as simple as binary enclosures in RSS, right? A tiny little switch flips, and the user experience becomes one that anybody can play with now, right? And so, you know, places like Odeo take this new platform, right? Things as simple as embedding tiny little Flash player right here so you can just hear it, right? There's no like launching other applications. You click and you start listening. The platform has matured to the point where the user experience can create participation. And it's cool. It's a lot of fun. In a couple of clicks, and it goes on your iPod, and you take it with you. That experience has been something that really kind of symbolizes how we're getting there. I showed you some examples of this before. The content management system, this is that slide that I used to describe like the tremendous amount of complexity that happens in content management systems, how these applications, these enterprise applications that cost hundreds and thousands of dollars and typically would fail because they try to do everything for everybody, right? But taking that old problem and looking for a narrower, simpler scope to it, new solution, so that we get to things like blogs that solve that for so many people. For at least the people that giant content management systems were totally inaccessible for, right? So we had way too much flexibility in those systems, right? Trying to do everything, and not enough access, not enough people being able to put stuff online. And that's how we've seen blogs sort of solve that problem. Just like the maps that I was talking about the other day, where maps were a search engine. Search for an address and it showed you a result page. If it was wrong, you did it again. And there was a lot of penalty to that navigational process. But with the new platform, right, and there was Google Maps. A new platform, like we're ready now, we can sort of use some of these technologies that have always been in the browsers, but are only now adopted enough that we can do something such as anticipatory navigation, where you have more map streaming in around it as you look, and as you start to drag around, you can actually have a fluid experience. So we see the shift from just pure web design, right? Drawing pictures of pages and rendering those pages into more of a user experience design. And that's what I talked about all morning, right? Usability, right? That, like, can people understand what's behind this link, into a more deeper understanding of how users are embracing what we're doing or not. And instead of inventing technology, we're much more about creating platforms. Rather than, I'm going to make this thing and you're going to come here and you're going to consume it here, but rather there's a platform that I can use the technology that I've created to think of my users as peers, that we can share in this back and forth. So let's look at some examples of designing around this stuff. If I think back about sort of the web development that we were doing before this sort of, as things came apart in the 2001, there's such an emphasis on information architecture, on the organization of how the content goes into a website to provide a navigational experience for people. And we always, we talked a lot about interaction design, right? How we place the elements on the page and how people interact with those elements to create an experience. But it was we typically, as an industry, talked more about big, large-scale information architectures, because those were the sites, the portals of the past that typically got the most attention, right? Trying to provide this giant experience for people. So I like this new emphasis on interaction design. Right? Because at some point, we've got a site organized, we have to build an experience, and, well, frankly, it's pretty daunting to be looking at this blank page. So where do we start? How do we do this? I like this definition of interaction design that comes from Alan Cooper, kind of a giant in our industry, a true sort of guru in design for the screen. He's probably best known for his work on Visual Basic for Microsoft, kind of inventing a way of doing development that no one had really ever considered before. He has this quote in his book, About Face. It says, "Our conscious mind is constantly reducing visual input into patterns." I love that idea, right? Like, there's no way that we would be able to function in the world if we had to recognize and identify every single thing that came into our eyes, right? You'd stare at this awful carpeting forever, like, oh my God, another speck, right? Or I'd look out over the people around us here and say, like, I'd have to try to recognize every single person. Instead, I see carpeting, people, right? I'm in a room, like. We reduce things into patterns, but we look for the key interesting things out of those patterns, right? So the philosophy around interaction design, and most of design in general, is to present the components on the screen as recognizable visual patterns. So I can come to a website, and I can see the website and go, I get this, right? There's navigation, there's tabs, there's the search engine. That's a pattern that I recognize. Oh, and there's the thing I'm interested in, right? So users can choose on a purely pattern-matching unconscious level which objects they should consider consciously. Man, I love this definition. Here's a great example of that. We all, or at least those of us who drive, know the pattern language of the signs that we interact with, the information that's being given to us. This is a really important pattern. Our lives are at stake at this pattern, at understanding, like, don't go in here, right? Or slow down, danger ahead, or whatever. There's a pattern that happens. And if you drive around on the freeways here in California, you'll see, and really look at it, it's a relatively complex pattern, a language that's been developed that we almost unconsciously understand, right? Like, I don't know if any of you have ever seen a sign like that, but you can tell me what it means, right? It doesn't mean, like, turn left to see an ostrich. It means, like, careful, like, there's this thing coming ahead, and you should watch out for something that looks like that. Although I don't know if they have many of those in California. But if you look at the pattern as you're driving around on the freeways, you'll see things like, for example, the place name will be in upper and lowercase, right? But it'll be all caps when it's a direction, next right, 1 mile ahead, right? Those are just simple little things that have built up over time so that we get this language and that we can drive our cars at 65 miles an hour down the freeway and have this stuff coming at us and just almost unconsciously understand what's happening and pick out the individual points that are important to us so that we can keep our attention where it needs to be. That's the key to interaction design. So I'm going to talk about a series of sort of fundamentals of interaction design and then apply that to this new platform that we're sort of dealing with to figure out how to engage in this participation with our users. So let's start with discoverability, one of the foundations of interaction design. Remember that picture of the factory and the people, and they're trying to like sync up through that one simple screen with the pixels? That's a lot about discoverability. What can I do here? How quickly and simply can I understand what I can do here so that finding stuff is easy? And just as an aside, I'll make a recommendation for a book that I think everybody in this industry should read, which is one by Peter Morville. He was one of the guys that started Argus, one of the first information architecture consultancies, frankly, in the world, with Lou Rosenfeld. Peter Morville's Ambient Findability, which is a mouthful, but a remarkable book. The subtitle is We Are What We Find. And he makes the case that finding things is the key to the web, right? That search has been the one thing that has historically been popular and necessary. And the easier it is to find things, the more we're not only able to accomplish things, but define who we are. So making finding stuff easy, discoverability. Online travel sites have been great at this. And we've seen them evolve over time to actually take a lot of the complexity and, frankly, a lot of the flexibility out of their interfaces and boil it down into things that they know their users are going to want, right? So, for example, this little bit here, include nearby airports. Turns out that if people can save a couple $100 on a ticket, they're willing to drive a little bit farther to go find that airport, but maybe only at their destination, or not at their destination, but only where they're leaving from, right? There's a lot of stuff here that's showing what it is possible to do on this interface, right? I don't want non-stop, I don't want a layover, right? I want a non-stop. They're taking the features that they have determined that people are after and made them discoverable on the interface. Now think about what we could do with some of the technologies that we've been talking about for the last couple of days to take this another step farther. This is kayak.com, and look at what they've got. How's that for discoverability? If I can't remember where I'm going, San Francisco to Boston, I type BOS, yes, there it is. Right? That takes the level of discoverability, right? It's a simple step that helps people without sort of being intrusive, without being in the way, by taking, like, sort of watching what people are typing, doing that real-time search. I've seen a lot of examples on blogs and other places of real-time search, right? Where as you're typing the characters, like, stuff is flowing in. Do you mean this? Do you mean this? Do you mean this? And always it felt a little sort of gratuitous, you know? Like, wow, you can do that, but let me just type the thing now, and I'll tell you if it's right or not. But this is one of the first examples I've seen where people can actually, it actually gives them a little help, right? Like, you don't know what the name of the airport is or what the code is for that particular airport. But by doing a little, and that was, frankly, that was Ajax in a nutshell, right? Like, looking at user input in real time, going back to the server, grabbing some data, bringing it back, and displaying it without the round trip of that, suggesting a feature that will enhance, not distract from users' goals. Now, what do you think about that? Was that useful? Is that a good step forward in what we're doing? Was it gratuitous? Any ideas? Any thoughts? Is it accessible? It's accessible? Is it accessible? You mean?
By the way, is it for?
That's such a good point. And there's so much going.
Okay, so I have to do that first.
Right. So the accessibility of a feature like that looks more at the degradability of a feature like that. So that you don't need JavaScript to get through that form, but the experience is a little more enhanced if you do have it. So where's the line, right?
Exactly.
So they don't need, there's no requirements, right? There's no like you have to be able to manipulate this JavaScript in order to get to fares. But the experience isn't as good. So how far do we keep degrading, and how far in the future do we keep degrading our experiences back? So is it web like 0.5 for people who need a screen reader forever? And then we can just keep making the rest of the web better and better and better. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is to that, but that's the start anyway. At least it's degradable. At least it's not a roadblock saying you can't come in. So you've heard a lot of people talk about AJAX. I talked about it the other day. I won't get too much into the mechanics of it, the back and forth of the HTTP versus the I just want parts of the page to change, to go back to the server and say like, ding, just give me the little pieces of information. Show me that they've changed. Let's move on. But when it comes to discoverability, I think there's a lot that we can add there. So do application controls accurately communicate their functionality? How do people discover features, right? How quickly can they discover features? Do they have to play with everything? Do they have to put the mouse over? Do they have to click through to see what's happening? This is a great example. What do those mean, that navigation bar at the top? Somebody please explain what happens if I click on this.
The next one is the same topic.
So light bulb equals topic? What do you mean, yeah? Duh. How would I have known that? The next versus this, which is the next one? That's just the next pose. Well, how does light bulb mean topic?
Well, because it's not person or sequential pose.
That's awesome. What does this mean? Turn one person into a lot of people? And then back again? That's right. That's the cloning feature. Careful before you click. Leave or join the group. Maybe a subscribe kind of functionality. We're going to say this is reply, and this is not new message. You see what I'm getting at? We can speculate, but we'd have to play with it to figure out. And more importantly, I actually believe, at some point discoverability can get overwhelming, and you have to assume that people need to learn a bit about an interface, especially if it's a kind of lightweight. But remembering is the thing that gets me, right? Like, if I learn this one and I use some other system, like I go do my webmail at my ISP, and they've got different icons, and now I've got to remember 2 sets of icons. And how many websites are there that I have to remember this stuff for?
Aside from the bad iconography, I think that one of the good things about Ajax is these widgets are very interactive, and the response to the user action is quick. So you have the opportunity to play in a reasonably efficient way.
A safe way.
Than flying an airplane.
Safer than flying. I'm so glad we do web design. Like, I'm riding my bike across the Golden Gate Bridge, and I always think, like, imagine designing this. Like, you don't iterate. If it doesn't work, like, oh, my God. I'm glad we're doing web design. But you're right. So the rich Internet applications using Flash or Ajax allow users typically to experiment without penalty, right, to experiment in a safe way. How about this? How about mental efficiency? Does the interface communicate immediately what you can do here, what you should do next, and what the value is? If I didn't know what ICQ was, I would have absolutely no idea what was going on this page. I would really have to dig in, right? Likewise, how about this? What's this website about? Tomatoes? Who said that's not fair? Oh, yeah.
One of the things I find interesting, when we did a usability study of some of our users, just to see if they thought the site was positive or negative on first glance, we suggested that they look at it at first, take their glasses off, look at it.
Right, take their glasses off. Interesting.
What they're doing, and then put them back on.
It's a little bit like that experiment I was talking about the other day where they flashed right? Like, what was that about? Like, did you trust it, right? And you can sort of take layers of that, right? Can you figure out what's going on here? Right, how quickly and simply do they communicate? Yeah, I mean, it's not fair. MSN is trying to be like the start page for the whole Internet. And frankly, MSN, Yahoo, they have kind of been successful at that. Although when you get that razor pinpoint focus of something like Google, it seems like maybe there is an alternative to something like this. Yeah, so all I can tell is there's something about tomatoes and mortgages. I guess that's what this is about. But it's almost impenetrable, right, at the surface. How about this? Roll your own search engine. Create a personal search engine. That's so simple. I would click to find out how, right? This takes one idea and boils it down as simple as possible. How about your files anywhere? Huh. I get it. That seems to make sense. It takes what can be a fairly complicated thing and tries to explain it as simple as possible. I love, frankly, putting steps on an interface, especially an interface that's introducing a concept to people, right? Look, 4 steps. You go straight across the bottom here and click sign up. That's how you do it. You sign up, you save your file, you browse the files, you get your files back. Wow, that's pretty simple. I don't know if that's good web design or not. There's interaction design that's happening there, that's going to be a mess. Let's watch this one. T-shirt shop here. Ooh, I want that T-shirt. Drag and drop down into the shopping cart. Awesome. I want this one too. Wait, no, actually I don't want that. Let me drag that one out. Poof. Check out. There we go. Wow. How about this? How would you discover that feature? Right? Like, I think that's really cool, and that'd be an interesting way of like building shopping carts and e-commerce website. But how would you discover that? For me, it was by complete accident. Right? Let me show it to you again. Oop, let me go back. Here's what happens. Like, you're scrolling down, and if anybody can tell me what that first T-shirt that I'm dragging in is, I'd be very impressed. Let me see if anybody knows. But this discoverability of that feature. So we have to be careful to balance this stuff, right? Wow, that's awesome. She knew. It's a Atari 2600 cartridge called Adventure, where you were the little dot, and that was a sword, and you grab the sword and you fight the dragon. Anyway, yeah, huh? Awesome, old school. 1977. But so here there's so much innovation. This is the noise that you're talking about, right? Like, there's so much innovation that's possible now that we have this new platform to play around with. That stuff like that may very well be a great solution, a great idea, but it may be too soon, especially when you're counting on converging, audience members into customers by them figuring out that they can drag a T-shirt down or drag it out and poof, it goes away. So discoverable features may still be too innovative, and that's the sort of balance that we have to play with now. What do you guys think of Google Maps? Love it. Once you know how it works. How did you figure out how it works? Do you remember? You just play with it? But the dragging. Yeah, I wonder about that. By accident? I think it said for a while, I don't think it says it anymore, but when it first launched, didn't it say, like, move around by dragging, by clicking and dragging? They must assume that people know. Yeah.
I thought first of those arrows up, left, right, down. That was the old metaphor, right? Of navigating the guy to the page and the pages there.
Right.
So my first instinct when I got to this was to put them up arrow, which zoomed me out.
Right. So one of the things that they did was put a transitional interface in there, right? So you have this up here. And what's interesting is I never use those anymore, but if you click on one of those, it actually scrolls over. And you're like, hey, something's different here, right? Like, have you followed a link recently to like MapQuest or something else, like through a real estate site? And the first thing I do, I click drag. Oh, crap! Like, that's so frustrating. But yeah. I went by my parents' house and I showed them Google Maps on there. And they were like, wow, this is great. And I came back like a week later and they had all these like images on their desktop that they had been dragging over. I'm like, so there is a point of innovation. And frankly, Google has the leverage, right, to be able to like, okay, hey, 500 million people who use our website, guess what? We're going to try scrolling now. And they made it, frankly, simple enough and kind of bulletproof enough that I think they made that shift. I think we can kind of follow them on there. That's the balance, right, between like what Google was able to achieve here and what the T-shirt shop I showed you was able to achieve. That's that transition we need to make. So.
Did the T-shirt shop have a way to an alternate way to?
Didn't they? Should we go back and take a quick look here? I think they have a little plus. Yeah, you can click on the plus as well. They also have that giant message at the bottom in a frame that doesn't move that says drag stuff here. So, they've got that as well. But yeah, so I wonder when it is that we can make the shift, when we can assume that people are going to come here and frankly expect to be able to do things like drag and drop and scroll and some of these technologies that frankly the web never worked that way, right? Clicking and dragging on the web to me means selecting text so that I can copy and paste it or something. It doesn't typically mean interacting with an element and affecting a change in that element. But it's starting to. All right, let's talk about recoverability. So it's one thing to explain to users what they can do, but it's another thing entirely to allow them to have that ability to play with things, to feel secure that the next click that they're about to make, the next thing they're about to do on our website is not going to screw them up. So actions should be without cost. Here's that Broadmoor interface in action, right? I can play and play and play until I think I'm done. And even if I am done, they're going to say, you know what, you're not quite done yet. There's a little bit of information that we still need from you. right? Without destroying any of the settings that I've already done, all I have to do is say, okay, oh, and look, they even tell me the bits that are incomplete and the bits that aren't yet. Let me show you that one just again to see how that works. So I click on a date. It lights up and says, well, actually, Superior not available, but I can get the Premier room. I got to fill in that information, but I try to move on. This could be as simple as like the JavaScript form validation we've always done. But it could be changing the very fundamental way we interact with stuff, right? Buying airline tickets, iterating through this is a time-consuming process, right? Finding that cheap ticket that still meets the sort of parameters for the travel that I want to take. How does this work? I've done a search from the front page. It comes here and it shows me, right, San Francisco to Burbank, all my options here, sorted by, I guess, price. But if I want to change it, right, actually all I want is nonstop flights. I have to redo the search. It goes back. It shows me that interstitial sort of, we're looking, finally reloads the page. Those actions aren't cheap. And by cheap, I mean I don't continue to play with the interface because I have to sit and wait between every little step I take. So let me show you what Kayak does. That's that Ajax-enabled one on the other end. I say, you know what? I'm not going to fly American West. And it says, okay, we'll take care of that. It's gone. And I say, you know what? I want to leave a little earlier, between 8:30 and 11:45. And it says, okay, let's narrow that down a little bit more, right? And I can play with these back and forth. It goes. Now let's talk about accessibility. Yeah, I don't know if it's required to have all the modern JavaScript-enabled browser to do all of that stuff. But what I do like is that we can explore, play with the data set, right? Narrow our range in. Say, oop, I went too far, move it back. And play around with that while we see, without a lot of that penalty of navigation, without going back and forth and waiting and waiting. It's interesting, being able to play with a lot of this stuff, being allow users to be in control of that experience and really make them feel like they're kind of in control. All right, is it difficult to perform unrecoverable actions? I won't go into the whole rant about the reset button on forms, but oh my gosh, it's probably the most widely adopted feature for destroying data without any user feedback at all that we've ever built. Here's a great example. I don't even remember what this new account is for, but I fill this entire thing in and I hit next. It disappears, right? It's gone. Everything I just typed in didn't ask me, like, do you want to reset the form? Just gone. I can't undo anything. So how many levels of wrongness do we have here? First, why do we need that? Anybody want to justify, like, maybe there's some sensitive information, things like that? How come the cancel button isn't just a back button to take me to the last place I was? Why does it have to erase all that information, especially in this particular context where there's no credit card information or anything like that? Second of all, shouldn't destructive things be designed differently from non-destructive things? And shouldn't they be based on some of the conventions that we have, even in Western civilization? I tend to think of, like, that way is next, and that way is back. I mean, that's just, like, that's my back and forth buttons on my browser are the same way. So here, the thing I think I should do next is the thing that actually does very bad stuff. So there's so many levels of why, of interaction design gone wrong here, right? Let's look at a couple more here. Does the interface offer assistance in recovery? So if I have made a mistake, do they help me? Does the interface help me try to correct that mistake? This is a pretty good example from some form here. I have forgotten the year on the birth date, and I didn't enter a password when I hit the button. So it came back and told me. So first of all, we did have to do the page refresh, right? We went to the server, evaluated the data, came back and said, well, there's a couple of mistakes here. We need you to fix it. But at least the designer was helpful enough to put the error messages in line to differentiate them enough so it's easy to find where they are, right? Very simple steps we can take to make the experience of getting through this a lot easier. Yeah?
Except it's not accessible.
It's not accessible?
It violates one of the premises.
That's true. They could use an icon of some sort to say, like, alert, there's a problem right here. Yes, I agree. The fact that they're simply using color. Some space, some bold. It's on the edge there, but I think they could do a little. Well, so for example, we did, what's that?
Space and bold is not going to help the blind.
They'd have to read all the way through. Right. So there's a couple things, right, that you can do. One, put the message in line. Here's an example of a redesign that we worked on a while back. I do like the little icon, something that says, things have changed here, even if you can't tell the color is different. I also think there probably should be at the top of the page a list of the errors that have happened and say, go down below and we'll show you where they are. And then I think you're in pretty good space with accessibility and things like that. What about if we avoided the problems entirely, right? And put everything without sort of navigating around. So here's an example of logging in with the measure map, and you come in and it asks you for this, and it is a click-through without JavaScript into a page that has this information. But keeping the context the same, right? Not letting people get lost in navigation as they click through. There's, again, another example of that. It's the wrong password. We're going back to the server, back and forth without reloading the page. It's very little penalty to the navigation. You can even change your password, everything sort of right inside, kind of similar to how a desktop application works for logging into things. I love this example. Let me just let you guys watch this, right? So I type in jeff@veeam.com for my email address. Thank you. And I say, I want my username to be Jeff. And they go to the server and find out that Jeff is already taken. And my password is not long enough. I can see what I need to do to get through this page without ever navigating. Jeff2 is fine. Let me add 6 letters to there you go. Enter it again. Oops, mistyped. Let's try that one more time. And I made it. That's awesome. Without any navigation, just literally like somebody sitting next to you going, ooh, watch out for that. I think that's just a fantastic example. Sadly, inexplicably, I go to iFilm, all this is gone now. I can't imagine why. Anybody know? Marketing. Can't blame everything on marketing. We could certainly try. So catching errors before they happen. I think this is a really good example of this done very well. A lot of that is stuff we've been able to do for a long time. JavaScript form validation, geez, been doing that for years. But this takes that next step, right? And opening a little connection with the big database of information out there. Going, yep, hold on, you know what? There's a problem with what you're about to do.
What about for nefarious purposes like harvesting of information? Couldn't you?
The security model?
Well, right here, right? So like it says jeff@veeam.com is taken. You now know that's a valid email address.
Right, you'd be able to do that anyway, though. Without Ajax. I mean, this is no different.
No, I understand, but I mean,
It's just a little easier.
Yeah.
Then again, the harvesting script would have to be able to use JavaScript and Ajax-enabled technology, so maybe it's a little barrier for that happening. But, yeah, wow, I tell you what, security is probably the number one thing that affects poorly usability on the web. Talk about a balanced issue, right? Like, oh, my God. Username and password, forgetting passwords, people so frustrated with that. That must cost organizations so much, but it's still so necessary. So I don't know where to fall down on that point. So let's talk about context a little bit. Placing things into context. Giving people a sense of time, a sense of place, and a sense of meaning as they're using relatively complex interaction designs, interactive applications. So users really need to know what's happening at every single stage of the process, of any process that they're doing online, but especially anything like Amazon and e-commerce, right? What can they do here? What happens next? Where did they come from? Where are they? Placing people into context, making absolutely sure they know everything that's happening to them. This is getting harder and harder. So FedEx does a good job of using branding, the surface level of their web design to sort of let people know there's a lot of consistency. Everything works the same way, but there's very specific parts of the website, very different products that they sell. I think they do a pretty good job of that. I really like this example. This is how you get a permit for something at the Boy Scouts website. You know what step you're on? Holy cow. Step 2, I mean, this is at the surface level. There may be some issues with this design, but at the interaction level, right, the structure of this page, the skeleton of this page, it's really clear where you are. And frankly, I'd rather people err in this direction, right, being just hitting people in the head with these are the steps you're going to have to do, and you are 2 of 6 of the way done. It's pretty cool. But the first impression is pretty important. And this plays in with the discovery that we were talking about. I want to show you a little bit of the work that Doug Bowman and I did on the Blogger redesign for how we sort of boiled down exactly what they were getting at into a first impression. So trying to help people understand what is this thing so that when they land on a page, they can be reoriented. They can know what's going on immediately. What does this mean? So I know where I am. But put that into meaning for me. Is there a value here that I can get out of what I've done? Right? If you've heard Jared Spool ever talk about the scent of information, right? His presentation on what users are constantly sort of seeking out the next step and evaluating every single click they do as to whether or not it's gotten them closer or farther away from the goal that they had in mind. Every single click, immediately they're like, was this the right thing or have I made a mistake? So determining value as soon as we possibly can, and then try to figure out what they should do next, right? How do we ask for a micro commitment? Like, all I want from you is one more click, because I assure you that I will get you closer to your goal. So when we started looking at some of the sites that were doing this effectively, this is back a couple of years ago, it became pretty clear that people had strongly different interfaces for web applications, whether you've never seen it before or whether this is the first time you've ever seen it. And for the Blogger redesign, it was interesting because they were a very technical group of people that had made a very innovative way of publishing on the web. But again, they just thought it was optimized and efficient FTP, right? No longer do you have to mess around with hierarchies of files and things like that. You type into the box, you hit the button, we put it on the website. So they thought very efficient way of managing a website. They were acquired by Google, and almost immediately Google put the little logo, the browser logo on the Google toolbar, and millions of people came to the front page of Blogger, which was a big, long blog that talked about server outages and stuff like that. They got very little conversion of that. So what we wanted to do is say, okay, we can take a lot of that information that you have on that front page of the blog and move it inside for the people who already know what this thing is, and let's do something as simple as we possibly can to explain to people what on earth a blog is. I mean, that's a piece of jargon in itself, and frankly a pretty ugly word at that. So what is this thing? How quickly can we communicate it? So we look at a site like Snapfish is a pretty good example. Peapod, right, buying stuff online. Ophoto was a good example of just how simple. Some of those other ones like Rolio and the file sharing one that I showed you, also good examples of boiling this message. What is a blog? What do you do with one? How do you get one, right? Is there any value there for me when I land on this page? So we started with that with a quick whiteboard sketch that turned into the simplest schematic, right? What is a blog? What can I do with one? And how do I get one? Like, can we take those messages and fit it into a screen and communicate that as fast as we possibly can? So here you can see some of the iteration, right? So 3 steps, like I said. I love it when you can communicate in a simple process how big of a commitment I have to ask of people. And here I'm asking them for simply 3 things. Give us a name, find a template, and get started. And that's the action you take, like get going. And still trying to put that into communication or into context so people can understand clearly. And then this is where sort of Doug came in and started doing the visual design. Maybe we can make it friendlier, right? We can take the hard edge of technology out of this, soften it up through typography and some elements that are just frankly a little friendlier, right? And he started to look at visual hierarchy on the page, the surface level of this. Taking that simple message and moving your eye across, like push-button publishing. Wow, like as simple as you possibly can. Take a quick tour if you want, right? And here are the steps. Go do it, right? Can we get people through this, like in less than a second or 2? Like how quickly could we communicate that? And we did a lot of usability testing around this. Like show them the page, take the page down and say, tell me what this thing does. And how could we affect that as quickly as possible? He played around with some visual styles. You see photorealistic icons there turning into even friendlier, more abstract icons to get people through this page as fast as possible. You can see us like trying to work on context here, putting this in context to make it as simple as possible. All right, let's finish up with feedback. We've got discoverability, recoverability, putting things into context, and now giving feedback, how the system responds. When I do a click, the system has to say something back, and if it doesn't say what I expect, or if it doesn't show me enough, I'm going to feel lost. I'm going to feel out of context. Just sort of searching around. So this is changing a lot. We were pretty used to the way websites responded. I clicked on something and the page went away. Then the page would redraw and something would be different, and I would find out how that responded to me. That was the interaction model that we used for about 10 years. People got pretty comfortable with that. It seemed to work pretty well. Here's a great example of that, especially when it took a long time for that to happen. I think that the airlines did, or at least the travel agencies did, a pretty good job of kind of holding people's hands through that. So they would click on something, and they would put up this screen that would sort of take a cue from video game design, right? When a new level is loading and they would show you something or tell a little bit more of the story so that you would keep engaged while you had to wait for the technology to respond. So that's what they did here. They're like, we're going to look, hold on, just wait a second. We did a very similar thing in the Blogger redesign. We had a problem. We found usability when we were testing the registration process. That you would come and you'd give your blog a name, type a few details about your account, hit the button, we say, okay, start posting. And people would be like, what? What happened?